I'm going to read you this post from Marco Rubio on X just about an hour ago. Quote, "We are reviewing the visa status of the trespassers and vandals who took over Columbia University's library. Pro-Hamas thugs," this again is a quote, direct quote, "pro-Hamas thugs are no longer welcome in our great nation." Now raise your hand if this is 100% what you voted for, because
tension is once again boiling over at Columbia University, this time inside one of its most iconic academic buildings. Just 2 days before final exams begin, dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters entered Butler Library, demanding the university cut financial ties to Israel-linked companies. It all started just after 3:15 p.m. Wednesday in Reading Room 301, where protesters refused to leave. Some called for the library to be renamed the Basel Al-Araj Popular University, in honor of a Palestinian activist who died in 2017. University officials quickly deemed the protest a major disruption, and within hours they called the NYPD for assistance. Video from inside the building shows safety officers blocking entry. One protester yelled, "You're hurting me!" 2 officers were injured in the clash. Acting President Claire Shipman said the crowd posed a safety hazard, including many not affiliated with the university. Protesters were warned they could face arrest for trespassing. Mayor Eric Adams confirmed the NYPD was asked to remove unlawful occupants, and Governor Kathy Hochul thanked public safety for keeping students safe. The protest echoes last year's demonstrations that started at Columbia and spread nationwide. But with final exams looming, university officials say further disruptions will not be tolerated, and disciplinary actions are on the table.
What's the worst that's gonna happen if you let people in, man? What's the worst that's gonna happen? What is the worst? You're gonna hurt people, man. You're gonna hurt people. So you're creating So you're getting people physically hurt.
During the protests at Columbia University, 2 safety officers, public safety officers, were injured, and now they're calling, the university is calling on NYPD to go and help. Remember, these protesters are violent Antifa members, or at least Antifa has incited them to go and do these things, which means that violence is their way. Of course, officers are going to get hurt, because that's the goal.
We have some breaking news out of Columbia University, where there are ongoing protests, and the individuals who are engaged in these protests did occupy a library on the campus of Columbia University. As you know, this is a protest for Palestine and the terrible atrocities that are being committed there by the state of Israel. And the New York Police Department has tweeted onto their official Twitter account. Note the time is 4:10 p.m. Pacific time, so that's 7:10 p.m. Eastern time, that at the direct request of Columbia University, the NYPD is responding to an ongoing situation on campus. So this means that Columbia is the one that called the cops on the protesters. They're claiming that they have occupied a library.
Things are going to absolutely erupt this summer. In addition to all the other protests going on, the pro-Palestinian protests are back. Columbia University called the NYPD to break up a sit-in that was taking place in the campus library, and they arrested 75 people. Let's just hope and pray that some of them don't end up in El Salvador. And before you start getting on the case of pro-Palestinian protesters who ditched Kamala in the election, you really need to redirect that anger. We're now getting word from Biden's staffers that he did almost nothing to push for a ceasefire in Gaza, even ignoring the law that required arms shipments to be stopped. Yes, of course, Trump is worse, and I, of course, voted for Kamala, but that's on Biden. He's the one that got out too late. He's the one that didn't put pressure on Israel. If people stayed home in the election, put your anger on him. We need people to be out in the streets this summer, and that includes everyone. We just need to ignore the Democratic establishment and all work together, regardless of what happened last year. We can't go back in time. And the energy protects us. The more of us there are out there saying things, the less at risk each of us is. As cliche as it sounds, it's going to take all of us.
I have to mention to you, this was, a very nasty tactic.
If I had a nickel for every time Columbia called the cops on its own students, I would have way too many nickels in the past 2 years. Basically, protesters took over the main reading room in our 24/7 main library, Butler Library, during reading week. So that's when students are obviously trying to prep for finals and things. And there were also tons of protests out and around campus, especially by other campus buildings that are outside of like our physical gates. Columbia's been in more or less lockdown mode literally since last year. Like still to access campus, to access most Columbia-owned buildings, you have to have a Columbia ID or be the registered guest of a Columbia student. The thing is, over the past 2 years, this university has reacted in the worst possible ways to protest. For example, on 113th and 114th streets between Amsterdam and Broadway are a ton of Columbia-owned housing situation. So this is where a lot of undergrads live. That's where Frat Row is. That's where several of our dorms are. And protesters were basically right outside of those streets. And so the cops actually, like NYPD, shut down the 114th and 113th streets in between Amsterdam and Broadway completely to anybody. It did not matter whether you lived in one of those dorms. It did not matter if you were a student at Columbia. I have friends right now who are sleeping on like couches because they aren't able to get back to their dorms. And for us engineers, tomorrow is our Senior Design Expo, which is the equivalent of like our thesis presentations, and it's a huge deal. It's like the peak of what we've been working for through the past couple years, arguably since we started undergrad, and we're not going to be able to celebrate this moment with a lot of our friends and a lot of our family because they also shut down campus to outside visitors for tomorrow. So on the night before one of the biggest presentations of our lives, a lot of engineers are sleeping in random places on air mattresses, unable to also get their loved ones to be able to visit them for this incredible accomplishment. The funniest part to me, not funny, but ironic part to me is that Columbia has clearly not learned from our mistakes. Last year, calling cops and arresting students who were protesting clearly did not end well. And this year, you're just doing it again, and you're imposing even harsher restrictions on people who arguably had nothing to do with any of the situations that are present. And they are ruining the end, these like huge culmination end of year moments for us, especially for us seniors. And before anybody gets on here and starts talking about how like, you know, I shouldn't be thinking about graduation or anything right now, I just want to say like, I support free speech, I support protest, I support all those things. This is a critique of Columbia University and how it continues to handle the student population, both people who are involved, not involved, adjacent, whatever it might be to the protest. This school continues to showcase that it does not put its students and our own safety first, and instead is always prioritizing other things. Because I don't care what you believe in terms of your politics, not being able to access the room and dorm that you pay thousands of dollars to pay for during finals week, to not be able to access libraries and all of these things that are supposed to be included in our tuition during reading week is horrendous. And I don't understand why the school continues to react in this way when in some situations it's completely unwarranted.
It was literally an art of deception because you were you visited the lot. You couldn't see any signs. We entered, there is no signs. They were hiding in the lobby, waiting for me to go through the interview.
We saw some officers seemingly hiding in their cars and at some point wearing a vest, which was a bit of an indication, but still everything seemed calm and nobody was coming in or out.
Right.
Why do you think they made you take the test, sign this oath? Why do you suppose, if you have any idea why they wanted to do that instead of just taking you right away?
I don't know why, but what I know is this is a betrayal to the constitution of this country and to the process. I've done everything the right way. I've gone through the process. I've applied the right way. I showed up for my interview. I shared and answered all of the questions honestly. And I said I am willing to defend and protect the constitution of this country.
I knew there was something more to these anti-Semitism investigations, and we finally have the proof. Listen up. So the Trump administration has threatened 60 liberal colleges over their alleged failures to handle anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment. But the real kicker is that they've threatened these schools with the loss of funding, and the most prominent being Columbia University, where they've clawed back $400 million. But now this administration is saying that Columbia can have its money back if it gets in line by doing these things, like submitting to an academic receivership whereby they hand over their Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies departments to be monitored by the federal government. In addition to academic receivership, which policymakers down in Texas are now considering for Texas University. Oh yeah, they've gone there. They want a mask ban, more powers for campus law enforcement, significant admission reform. I'm guessing that means they're trying to cut out all those foreign students and troublemakers. And they want to control how and when students protest. Signed by Thomas Wheeler, the acting general counsel of the Department of Education. There are too many schools on this list not to fight back and tell the Trump administration that this is unconstitutional and that they, like the Georgetown University law professor said, get to determine what is taught at these universities, who teaches it, and the time and place that it happened. The Trump administration can't use anti-Semitism as a smokescreen to defund and control liberal American universities. We see you. We need more university presidents and deans with courage. Will we see any, or will they roll over? Because as we've learned with bullies, when you give in, they never stop asking for things. So now is the time to fight, because the Trump administration will never stop.
So let's unpack this one in two arenas. First, let's talk about the violent protests on the campus. And this is just me doing a quick Google search. I'm not trying to spin it in any particular way. This is just from an NBC News article. Okay, just from this article, students established an encampment on several dozen tents on university lawn and at one point occupied a university building. Arrested in demonstrations that regularly, students that is, arrested in demonstrations that regularly featured controversial political slogans. Some Jewish students joined in the protesters. Others felt like the demonstrations were hateful. Several Jewish students reported being assaulted at the universities. So yes, to that end, I would agree. We can't have this conversation without acknowledging that there were some bad actors in this particular setting, and the protest apparently turned into a less than peaceful measure. This gets into the conversation of, okay, well, we can't just do a common blanket statement just because of a few bad actors, right? There has to be nuance to this sort of thing. And those bad actors can be punished while also the peaceful protesters can continue on with what they're doing. That's just America. That's freedom of speech. It's the notion that you can't typecast an entire group based upon the actions of one or a few, which is exactly what the Trump administration is doing to Columbia University as a whole because of this. Does Columbia University share a responsibility to ensure that these protests remain peaceful? Yes. Do I fault them for allowing these protests to take place in the first place? No. And that should be pretty commonplace, right? I mean, that's something I think we can all agree on, that the university wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong by allowing these protests. Could they have done more to stop the bad actors? Of course. Okay, so let's get on to part 2 of that, and we're going to talk about endowments. And again, just from a quick Google search, it looks like Columbia has roughly a $15 billion endowment. So yes, they should absolutely be able to fill in the gaps sans federal funding in some capacity. But, and this is where I really want to make a point here, what the government is funding benefits everybody. The grants and research that they're handing out is a means of contracting, if you will, because the government, for as small or as big as you want it to be, isn't really all that big. It needs to outsource. That's why a lot of these different things are contracted. And that includes significant amounts of research for the public good. And again, just to go over what is being affected, antiviral nasal sprays for infectious diseases, scientific studies on maternal mortality and morbidity, treatments for chronic illnesses such as long COVID, caring for newborns with opioid withdrawal syndrome, and screenings for colorectal cancer, amidst more. So what is literally happening here is that the university has students and other who have acted in bad faith towards the nature of peaceful protests, and the government is pulling away funding because of that, which seems to be that the punishment does not fit the crime, of speaking metaphorically here, because of the fact that all of this money, all these research grants directly impact people's lives in a positive way. 180 staffers just lost their jobs. These screenings, these medical studies are going to save hundreds, thousands of lives, right? So reconciling the fact that this is an extreme take by the administration when the university could have done more to crack down on these students who are acting in bad faith, let's be real here, but it's just too much. It's unnecessary, and it doesn't make sense to say, oh, well, just because these students did X, Y, and Z, all of a sudden, the entire university and all of this research and all of this, like, students are there for this research. They're there to do this work. And to lay a blanket claim across everybody is way over the top and more than necessary. And I think that's fairly worth criticism of the Trump administration. Because at the end of the day, the government needs to be acting in service of the citizens. And that's what these research grants and funding was for. And by pulling that, I don't think that they are. And so, again, that's where we can rightly criticize what's going on.